Trump demanded 90% of Burkina Faso's oil and gold within 24 hours. No talks, no discussions, just surrender. What he got instead was resistance. One president, 3 armies, and a quiet uprising no one saw coming. Subscribe now. Africa is on the rise, and this is only the beginning. It started with a single sentence buried in a classified document. Just one line, but powerful enough to send tremors across an entire continent. President Ibrahim has 24 hours to hand over 90% of oil and gold reserves or face the consequences. And at the bottom, scrawled in bold red ink, a signature that read more like an order: Donald J. Trump. But this wasn't an official US government action. This was something far more opaque. Trump, no longer in the Oval Office, was now operating in the shadows, using his global business reach like a private army. Through covert networks and diplomatic intermediaries, he had launched what insiders were calling an economic blitzkrieg. His latest target, the resource-rich and resolute Burkina Faso. There were no talks, no press conferences, and certainly no compromises. Trump's approach wasn't coated with diplomacy. It was the voice of control. His demand, near total domination of Africa's newest oil fields and full authority over its gold supply chains. The tone was clear, ruthless, cold, and transactional. "We protected you from terrorism," Trump allegedly stated. "Now it's time to repay the debt." What Trump and his supporters hadn't anticipated was the man who received that message. President Ibrahim didn't hesitate. He didn't delay. He summoned 2 key figures, his top military commander and his intelligence chief. With one firm sentence, he altered the course of African politics. "Tell the Americans this land is not for sale." That rejection wasn't just a reply, it was a signal. It ignited a wave that spread from Lagos to Johannesburg, from Harlem to Hackney. Trump demands Africa's gold. Ibrahim given 24 hours. But this time, Africa didn't bow, it rose. Because this threat didn't land on a compromised leader's desk. It reached a soldier, a man forged by hardship, raised with grit, and shaped by sacrifice. A man who knew the cost of submission and refused to repeat history. This isn't just politics. It's the true battleground of independence. This is how power speaks, and this is how Africa responds. The door clicked shut behind the intelligence chief. Outside, the capital moved to its usual rhythm. But inside the presidential complex, a new command had taken hold. President Ibrahim stood firm in the center of a dimly lit war room. Maps of critical infrastructure, oil routes, gold reserves, communication networks, flashed across the walls. Checkpoints blinked in red. Not out of panic, but readiness. The refusal had been made. Now came the response. No press briefings, no diplomatic talks. This was not negotiation, this was resolve. Mobilization began. The president called upon his defense minister with a direct order: secure the Eastern Oil Corridor. This region, Burkina Faso's petroleum zone, still marked as classified on public maps, was instantly put under restricted access. All civilian travel was suspended, foreign observers were grounded, and surveillance drones were reassigned to non-stop patrol cycles. Any unauthorized communication in or out was to be identified, blocked, and reported straight to the presidency. Next came the focus on gold. For Burkina Faso, gold wasn't just a key export, it was vital to survival. In 2023, the nation produced over 57 tons, with nearly 80% of its exports tied to the precious metal. More than a fifth of the national budget relied on it. But now, that lifeline was under threat. President Ibrahim summoned the top executives of SOEMI, the state-run gold agency. His instruction was direct. No gold leaves the country without government protection. Immediately, all export channels were redirected through military-escorted routes. 2 primary mining zones, Bong and Wagnan, were placed under full control of the Sovereignty Force, a covert military unit activated only during national crises. Every foreign gold company was issued a single notice, license under review. Prepare for possible withdrawal. At the same time, the Ministry of Communication initiated a blackout. Foreign media access was halted. No live data could be transmitted from energy regions. The national broadcaster was given a clear directive: gear up for an all-out information campaign. No panic, no surrender. Tell the story from an African perspective or not at all. Yet the president understood. Real resistance didn't come from sealed bunkers. It came from the people, and the people had already started to act. In Ouagadougou, elderly women, some old enough to remember colonial times, assembled outside military barracks at sunrise. They brought food, water, and medicine. Their message was quiet but resolute. We support those who protect us. University students converted lecture halls into coordination centers, not for protests, but for organizing. They created night patrol schedules, set up aid networks for border communities, and translated the president's address into 10 local languages. Taxi drivers offered free rides. Fishermen sent dried goods to remote garrisons. In one town, miners marched to the prefect's office and volunteered for monitoring duties. No one had instructed them to do so. They simply acted. Across Africa, the signal was clear. The story spilled across borders. In Ghana, retired soldiers volunteered to train Burkina Faso recruits. In Tanzania, activists kicked off a campaign titled "Defend the Soil." Over in Trinidad, radio hosts played President Ibrahim's speech every morning at sunrise. And in the United Kingdom, Black British activists held a quiet vigil outside the Foreign Office, holding a single sign: Africa has drawn the line. But inside the presidential compound, there were no celebrations. President Ibrahim walked through, one secure room after another, scanning encrypted maps, reviewing satellite images, and analyzing intercepted communications from foreign embassies. He wasn't anticipating their next step. He was already preparing for it. Burkina Faso was no longer simply resisting. It was reinforcing, not only its borders, but its belief. Sovereignty wasn't just a slogan. It was a system that could be protected, upheld, and lived. And as the sun dipped behind the Sahel hills, one fact lingered like smoke in the air. The game had shifted, and President Ibrahim was no longer playing defense. No one was ever meant to find it beneath. The cracked clay of northern Burkina Faso, hidden between long-forgotten villages and broken roads, lay something buried for generations. Not myth, not folklore, but power. Real, liquid, dark power. Oil. President Ibrahim had long suspected its presence. He had heard whispers from retired surveyors and stumbled upon geological reports lost in colonial-era archives. So, even before the world turned its attention to him, he acted. A covert task force was assembled, comprised of engineers, military officers, and select experts, all sworn to secrecy. The mission spanned 3 continents. Russian seismic teams mapped the subsurface. Iranian drones surveyed the terrain at dusk. North Korean coders built encryption protocols more advanced than anything in the West. No officials were briefed. No partners were alerted. The entire operation was locked within the presidency. Then it happened. A drill pierced the earth. Pressure escaped with a hiss. And what followed changed everything. Not drops, not traces, but a strong, pressurized flow, powerful enough to reshape the nation's future. But Burkina Faso wasn't the only one watching. High above, a different kind of surveillance came to life. Thermal satellites, run by foreign states, tuned to pick up even the faintest energy shifts. The signal was clear. An oil discovery in a region absent from any international energy registry. Within 48 hours, alarm bells rang in Virginia, Paris, and Brussels. US intelligence called it a sovereign petroleum anomaly. France warned of a strategic realignment risk. Chevron held an emergency meeting, but the alarm wasn't about the oil itself. It was about who had discovered it and who wasn't invited. Because this wasn't a global joint venture. This wasn't an extraction deal tied to debt. This was a Burkina Faso-controlled oil field, secured by national forces, overseen by the state, and entirely sovereign, off-grid from global oversight. Even more unsettling, the operation had already begun. Equipment was seen being transported from Venezuela across Benin's highways. Encrypted messages hinted at a sovereign route connecting Burkina Faso to allied ports, bypassing the IMF, the World Bank, and Western insurance firms. That's when the media narrative kicked in. Major networks rolled out synchronized reports. Authoritarian oil push, energy mismanagement endangers West Africa, isolationist leader destabilizing the region. Experts warned of a repeat of Libya. News anchors questioned Ibrahim's mental stability. Leaked intel painted the country as a rising rogue state, but this time something had changed. In Bamako, students painted murals of oil rigs cloaked in Burkina Faso's flag. In Lusaka, digital artists shared posters captioned, "He found it, not for sale." Black activists across the UK, US, and Caribbean remixed Ibrahim's speech over trap beats, over jazz, over silence. Burkina Faso wasn't just extracting oil, it was digging into history. Western fear wasn't baseless. Ibrahim hadn't just unearthed hidden resources, he revealed a hidden truth. Africa's wealth was never lost, it had been buried, suppressed, and stolen. Now, the script was flipped. For too long, leaders had traded their people's future. In boardrooms, only to return with empty statements. But this time was different. This soldier had acted before global powers could respond, and that scared them. Because if oil could be discovered, protected, refined, and exported, without their banks, without their permissions, the entire system could collapse. Burkina Faso had raised its flag, and others were watching. If you believe Africa deserves control over its own land, drop a comment below. Type Amen to show your support for Ibrahim. For 72 hours, the world held its breath. Would Burkina Faso be left to stand alone? Then came the roar of engines. 3 military planes landed quietly on an airstrip in Ouagadougou. No flags, no officials, no press. Just 3 men from Mali, Colonel Assimi Goïta, calm, with steel in his gaze. From Niger, General Abdourahmane Tiani, battle-hardened, focused. From Guinea, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya, broad-shouldered, walking, with nothing to prove. They entered the presidential chamber, no interpreters, no scripts. The handshake with President Ibrahim wasn't for show, it was solidarity. When they emerged, the region shifted. At the joint press conference, no teleprompters, no rehearsed applause. Doumbouya spoke first, touch Burkina Faso, and you touch all of us. It wasn't just a warning, it was a declaration. The AES, the Alliance of Sahel States, was no longer just an acronym. It had become a shield, forged not in treaties, but through coups, sanctions, betrayal, and collective resistance. Within a day, the alliance mobilized. AES surveillance drones began border patrols. Encrypted communications linked mines to joint command centers. Emergency air corridors were activated between Niamey, Bamako, Conakry, and Ouagadougou. And still, they pushed forward. Mali deployed experienced field strategists to secure oil infrastructure. Niger sent desert-tested logistics units. Guinea offered its airspace for emergency response. The alliance had come alive, not just in action, but in meaning. But the most powerful tool wasn't weaponry. It was the narrative. AES-backed media began broadcasting a counter-narrative. No flashy studios, no corporate spin, just raw footage, verified facts, and unapologetic voices. One headline echoed across the continent. Africa is not your gold mine, not your gas pump, not your back door. In Bamako, university students marched in waves wearing shirts with Ibrahim's silhouette. In Conakry, street artists painted him standing on oil barrels, Burkina Faso's flag waving in one hand, classified, US documents in the other. In Niamey, mothers brought meals to army camps chanting, "He said no, now we stand with him." Even outside AES, across Chad, Central African Republic, Togo, youths joined in. Social media exploded with a slogan that needed no explanation, AES or death. Western diplomats scrambled. Intelligence briefings had missed one key insight. This resistance wasn't about a single leader, it was about ending a pattern. For over 100 years, Africa was taught to bow, first to guns, then to banks. But now, the rifles were aimed in new directions, and the banks were being told to wait outside. At the US Embassy in Dakar, demonstrators stood for hours with signs that required no translation. "We own our land. Keep your deals." Back in Langley, a new entry was logged in a black folder marked AES, High Risk Strategic Shift, Contagion Potential Severe. Because this wasn't just a defense strategy, it was defiance, a new principle, sovereignty by any means necessary. While the West reacted and recalibrated, two powers advanced, not with fanfare but with precision. The 72 hours had ended. After the ultimatum went public, a quiet Chinese delegation touched down in Ouagadougou. There were no ceremonies, no red carpets or formal dinners, just a team of engineers, economists, and a folder titled Complete Sovereign Infrastructure Proposal, 90 days. Inside were three key offers. First, a fully modular oil refinery system, ready to be built and running in less than 3 months. No need for offshore processing or reliance on Western facilities. Second, a gold valuation mechanism to eliminate dependence on European banks, allowing Burkina Faso to independently assess the value of its own minerals. Third, a digital currency, a model that enabled trade using the Chinese yuan, bypassing the CFA franc and the US dollar. No more colonial-era currencies, no more dollar-dominated leverage. There were no hidden conditions, no interest payments, no long-term debt traps. Just one clear principle: mutual respect and full sovereignty. President Ibrahim didn't hesitate. He signed the cooperation framework within hours. The Chinese team departed as discreetly as they had arrived, but they left behind their mark. In blueprints, in shipping records, and in promise. Then came the Russians. A military transport plane, an Ilyushin, landed at a restricted base near the capital. Its cargo, crates marked with Cyrillic codes. Inside were sophisticated electronic warfare tools, drone jamming systems, and thermal tracking technology, not for show but for strategic defense. Alongside the equipment were trainers, battle-tested veterans from Eastern conflict zones. But this time, they weren't acting as mercenaries. They were here as integrated defense advisors. Their task, to prepare Burkina Faso's elite sovereignty unit in unconventional warfare, electronic defense tactics, and rapid response border security. This wasn't about foreign control. It was about local strength, and most notably, it came without a single dollar of IMF loans. No added foreign debt. No patronizing lectures from Western policy institutes. Just action. By the end of the week, oil fields were secured by Russian-grade anti-drone systems. Mining communications were protected through Chinese mesh networks. And energy exports? They were now priced in yuan. Burkina Faso had shifted the narrative. The reaction from the West was swift and panicked. CNN labeled it a dangerous axis of support. The US State Department issued a subtle warning about aligning with autocratic states. European finance leaders scrambled to find ways to block non-SWIFT transactions. But across Africa, the message was received loud and clear. In Nairobi, newspaper. Headlines declared, "He said no, and still he rises." In Barbados, one columnist wrote, "Ibrahim may have just redrawn the map of freedom." And in Lesotho, a school mural appeared overnight. A Chinese engineer passing tools to a Burkinabe builder with the caption, "Not aid, not debt, just help." This wasn't East replacing West. This was Africa choosing, perhaps for the first time, not between rulers, but between futures. And in President Ibrahim, the world was seeing something new. A leader who didn't plead, didn't bow, and didn't fight with slogans, but with systems. When the final decision came, it happened in silence. There were no cameras, no applause. Just a closed-door session of the National Assembly, called by the president in the early morning hours. No foreign diplomats, no media present. At exactly 03:42, a unanimous vote passed a resolution that changed the nation's bond with its land. All oil and gold reserves within Burkina Faso's borders were now nationalized, permanently protected. From any foreign corporate ownership, no loopholes, no appeals, no extensions. By dawn, hand-delivered letters reached every Western company still operating in the country. Gold mining licenses held by French and Canadian firms were immediately revoked. US-sponsored energy survey teams were escorted out, all. Embassies received the same notice. Burkina Faso's resources are not negotiable. They belong to the people. And then came the broadcast. President Ibrahim appeared on national television, not in military uniform, not behind bulletproof glass, but dressed in traditional Burkinabe attire, he stood before the nation, decree in one hand, constitution in the other. His voice was steady, his message clear and cutting. We've been taken advantage of for generations. Now that we've discovered our resources, they want them back. He paused. But I'm not here to serve empires. I'm here for the people who have endured far too much. Then came the words that would reverberate far beyond the borders. Burkina Faso is not afraid, and I do not negotiate with thieves. The streets outside exploded with celebration. Women danced with painted faces, miners pounded rhythms on their helmets, young people scaled lampposts waving the national flag. Children clanged pots and pans in harmony with elders singing freedom, songs older than the countries they now lived in. From Lagos to Kinshasa to Nairobi, spontaneous gatherings erupted. One sign read, "He said no, our gold, our rules." In Jamaica, musicians dropped reggae versions of his speech. In Atlanta, murals appeared bearing the words, "He stood up, now we stand with him." But not everyone was applauding. Just 12. In hours after the nationalization order, a tweet exploded across the internet in all caps and outrage. Ibrahim just made the biggest mistake of his life. Africa will pay for this. Donald J. Trump. Markets flinched. Oil CEOs called emergency meetings. Pentagon analysts rechecked surveillance data. The empire had made itself clear, loud, shaken, and angry. As for Ibrahim, according to aides, he laughed when shown the tweet. His response, "That's what an empire sounds like when it's losing control." But the threat was serious. Satellite monitoring over the Sahel tripled. 2 American warships edged closer to the Gulf of Guinea. A classified NATO report warned of growing instability. AES intelligence picked up whispers of potential covert attacks. Burkina Faso's military moved to high alert. Anti-air defenses were activated, oil facilities secured. Key government officials were moved to safe locations. The region responded immediately. Mali deployed armored vehicles to its borders. Niger reconfigured its radar system to shield its airspace. Guinea launched rapid response measures. A united front emerged. Any foreign attack would trigger joint defense actions. Still, the strongest answer didn't come from governments. It came from the people. In Johannesburg, they marched to the US consulate. In Dhaka, crowds formed human shields around the embassy. In London, the African diaspora held silent vigils, faces painted gold, holding signs that read, "Touch Ibrahim, and you touch all of us. Africa is not your battlefield." Then, on a quiet Sunday night, Ibrahim posted a video, just 43 seconds long. No music, no edits, just him speaking directly into the camera. This is not just about oil or gold. This is about Africa's soul, and I'd rather die standing than live on my knees. The video was reshared over 12 million times within a day. Even former African leaders who had long stayed silent began to speak. One called him the beginning of a new generation. Another said simply, "We didn't believe it was possible, now we know." As Burkina Faso prepared for whatever would come next, one truth rose higher than any threat. While the world feared breakdown, Africa was learning to breathe again. The line had been drawn, not just in the sand, but in history. President Ibrahim didn't wait for permission. He didn't seek approval. He did what every true leader must do when the moment demands it. Now the question is no longer about him, it's about us. What will you remember? That one man stood firm in the storm, or that a continent finally found its voice? Will Africa control its future or keep renting its power? And more importantly, if your land held oil, gold, and strength, would you sell it or protect it? Let us know in the comments. What does President Ibrahim mean to you? What does African dignity mean in a world driven by extraction? Would you choose sovereignty or silence? Tell us below. And if you believe in Africa's right to choose its own destiny, don't just watch, take action, like this video, share. Subscribe for more stories the world would rather keep hidden. Until the next chapter, stay grounded, stay alert, and stay proud. We'll see you in the next story.